Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're moving on to 4.5, day 3 for graphs of sine and cosine. Okay, we're going to be solving problems involving sine and cosine graphs with the aid of the graphing calculator. Yay! Alright, now we're going to be graphing, and when we're doing these graphs, one thing the book's going to ask you to do is to graph at least 2 full periods in the calculator, and unfortunately I think at least is a very, very vague phrase, because if I set my window to negative 8 million to positive 8 million of the x, I'm pretty sure I'm going to get at least 2 full periods. So I want to be able to do this and get exactly 2 full periods, despite what the book says. So here's what I would prefer to see you be able to do. Okay, if I look at the changes in the x and the changes in the y direction, I should be able to adjust my window manually to come up with a good set of values so that I get exactly 2 full periods of this graph on the screen. Okay, so first thing I want to do is look at the changes of x direction. Okay, now those will be changes in the period or any sort of phase shift. So first of all, let's take a look at the period. Okay, now the period in this case, as always, is going to be 2 pi divided by whatever our b value is. And in this case, that's 4. So 2 pi over 4 is going to give me a nice pi over 2. Alright, so basically I'm going to go pi over 2 to the right and to the left of whatever my starting point is, and then that'll give me my x min and x max. Okay, so basically what the starting point is going to be, again, normally right at the origin, but I want to shift based on any sort of phase shift I have, and I have one in this case. So in our case, shifting, or phase shift in the x direction. Okay, again, remember this guy is lying to us, so it's a positive pi divided by the 4. Okay, and if you like the pi over 4, since it's positive, we can kind of say that this is going to the right. Okay, so what that does for us now is I'm going to start at pi over 4 and then go basically plus or minus pi over 2 to get my x min or x max. So let's do that as 2 separate things. Here's my starting point of pi over 4, and now let's go plus, pi over 2, and again, for those of you fraction impaired, pi over 2 is basically 2 pi over 4. So in the positive direction, so my new x max is going to be basically 3 pi over 4. And you will be able to type that in your calculator, just make sure you do it carefully so it knows what you mean. Okay, and if I do this the other way to find my min, pi over 4 minus the pi over 2, I'll write it as 2 pi over 4, is going to give me a negative pi over 4. Okay, so my x min is going to give me negative pi over 4. Now right there with these two values, at least in the x direction, I'll be able to say exactly 2 periods of the graph. Okay, again, with that at least, if you went a little bit further in both of these directions, I wouldn't argue with that too much, but again, I don't want you to go to extreme measures here to make sure you have the at least 2, because when you start doing that, you start getting a garbagey looking graph. So if you shoot for 2 exactly, what you should get is something that looks very, very nice. Okay, moving on to changes in the y direction. Okay, we might have some vertical shifts or we might have some amplitude changes, and we have both here. Okay, now first thing I want to take account of is, let's just say the easier one is the amplitude. Now remember that's the absolute value of that front number, so in this case it's 3. And also we have to account for any sort of shifts. So what we're going to do is shift, in this case, up 7 because of the 7 right here. Okay, so if we think about it for a second, okay, we're starting at 7 for my midline, and then we're basically going to go plus 3 to get to a maximum value of 10, and then I'm going to go to the midline down 3 for my amplitude, and that's going to be taking me to a value of 4. So y max is going to be 10, y min is going to be 4, and using these 4 values as those x mins, x max, etc., you should get a very, very nice picture of your graph. Again, if you want to go a little bit past those to have a little bit of free space on your graph, it's not a bad idea, but there's those values that will come in really, really handy to get a very good picture of your graph. Alright, so, well, as a side note, here's the homework assignment. I didn't have any place better to put it, so there it is. Okay, moving on. Okay, if we want to determine an equation for a graph, okay, now, the good thing about what the book's going to do in these questions, and what I would do on a quiz, is give you kind of a format to work from. Because quite honestly, because these are cyclical graphs, and cosine and sine are kind of just shifted versions of each other, without giving some kind of a structure, you actually have almost an infinite number of answers to work with. So here we go. So a little bit of structure right here as far as what our answer is going to look like, and then basically now we need to piece together what we see on the picture to match the form of the equation that we're given. Okay, so right off the bat, my final answer I know is going to be y equals maybe some number, cosine, and then maybe some kind of a number there for a shift. Okay, I'm not messing with the period because there's no b value, and I'm not messing with any sort of a horizontal shift because there's no c value in there. So I'm just trying to figure out something about the amplitude and something about a vertical shift. So here we go. Okay, now again, very important thing is figuring out where that midline is, because that basically tells you the horizontal shift. So if I take a look at what this is, and this is not all labeled, so I go as high as 1, and if I kind of come across here, I'm going as low as -3. Okay, so basically just the average of those two is going to be a value of -1. So that basically tells you that's my midline. And also, that tells me that that is now my vertical shift. So I've got my possible number with my cosine x, and my vertical shift is a down 1, so right now I know I've got a -1. And then really from there, it's not too tough of a task to put together our a value, because again, the amplitude is just how high or how low you go to hit a crest or a trough from the midline. And so from -1 up to +1 is 2, and if you don't trust yourself, you go over here a little bit, and then go from -1 down to -3, and in both cases the answer is 2. Okay, now one thing that I haven't mentioned yet that you have to be careful of, okay, should it be a -2 or a +2? Okay, well, the normal cosine graph does kind of start at the top of the curve, which means this guy has not been reflected, so it means I do keep a +2. If this guy was upside down, I would have had to go with a -2. But basically, there's the equation that would give me this graph. Okay, of course, the reason for all this mathy stuff we do is to be able to take real-world things, whatever they may be, and model them after these fancy math things that we do. Alright, so here we go. Okay, the respiratory cycle, breathing in and out. Okay, after exercising for a few minutes, a person has a respiratory cycle for which the velocity of the airflow is approximated by v equals 1.75 sine of pi t over 2, where t is the time in seconds. And we're inhaling when v is positive and exhaling when v is negative. Alright, we want to find the time for one full respiratory cycle. Now that sounds like a whole bunch of fanciness, but one full respiratory cycle, hey, wait a minute, cycle, that's kind of something like what we were working with, and yes, that basically is a synonym for period, at least in the context we're going with here. Alright, so basically I just need to know what my period is, and of course period is going to be my good buddy 2 pi over b. In this case, notice my b is a fairly messy sort of thing, pi over 2. Okay, and so maybe a good way to write this out, in case it's not obvious to you, it's 2 pi over 1 times the reciprocal of the denominator, which in this case would be 2 over pi, and canceling my pi's out, multiplying across gives me a 4. And one thing that's maybe important to notice here is that this number is coming from this quantity, and notice the variable in that quantity is the time in seconds, so this is for seconds. So after the exercise, this person is making an inhale and an exhale every 4 seconds. Alright, I've got the equation in there again, just for the video purposes. If you print out the notes, you still have the paragraph on the same page, but here we go. Okay, now I need to find the number of cycles per minute. Now this is one where people start freaking out for basically no good reason. It's that overthinking it thing. Okay, now the cycles, again, as we already said, period. So, how many periods do we have per minute here? Okay, well, okay, again, if you overthink this, yes, you'll be dealing with this for hours trying to figure it out, but hey, wait a minute, there's 60 seconds in 1 minute, and we just figured out that there are 4 seconds in 1 period. So trying to make this look like unit conversions from science class. And then, hey, there we go. So the seconds and seconds cancel. The 4 and the 60 can kind of reduce down to a 15. So basically what we have, 15 periods or cycles per minute. So again, you can overthink that and spend an hour on it, or you can kind of take a look at it, realize what we're talking about, and you're done in a few seconds. Okay, the other thing is sketch the graph of the velocity function right here. And, well, again, one of those things, if you kind of pay attention to what the graph is doing based on the equation, you can actually set up the window pretty nicely for yourself. Okay, now I kind of put a graph on here, but what's probably more relevant is actually where our max and min values are in both the x and the y direction. Okay, well, now again, here's an amplitude of 1.75, and I do have no vertical shift whatsoever. So basically, my midline is still at 0, but I'm going up and down 1.75. So maybe it's obvious here, maybe not, but when I made my graph, I went up to 2 and down to -2, and that gave me a little bit of slack as far as a little bit of extra space on the graph. Here we go. The other thing is, how far do I go from left to right? Well, again, here's the y-axis. I think it's pretty obvious how I'm at 0. Again, in a real-world context, though, you know, negatives usually don't come into play very much, so I'm going to go with 0 as my starting point. First person taking their first breath here. And then, well, I wanted to full periods again. And again, since a period was 4 seconds long, basically I went out to 8. And then that gave me this very, very nice looking graph from there. Okay, now I try to make this short and sweet. Hopefully I accomplished that. Of course, if you have questions, I'll see you in class. Please ask me there.